So apparently some stepfathers think kicking out their teenage stepson will teach him about being a real man. But this Father of the Year was about to learn that his actions have consequences. Welcome back to the channel. Today we've got a stepfather who threw his 18-year-old stepson out with 3 duffel bags, thinking the kid would come crawling back begging for help. Wrong move. This son doesn't just survive on his own. He builds a tech empire and comes back to buy his stepfather's house right out from under him. Real quick though, if you're enjoying what we do here, consider liking and subscribing. It's free and helps us out. Now let's dive in. Richard cleared his throat. Here we go again, with another lecture. I kept my eyes on my plate, cutting the dry chicken into neat little pieces. If I looked busy enough, maybe he'd find someone else to pick on tonight. You know what your problem is, Michael? Richard asked, jabbing his fork in my direction across the table. No sense of responsibility. I glanced up for a second and caught Mom's eye before she quickly looked away, suddenly super interested in her mashed potatoes. 10 years with Richard had perfected her disappearing act. I turned in all my college applications last week, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice flat. I'd learned the hard way that showing any emotion just gave Richard more to use against me. College, Richard scoffed, like he'd just tasted something bad. What a waste of money for people who don't know what they want. By your age, I was already working full-time, making real money. Across the table, Jessica smirked behind her water glass. My 24-year-old stepsister had switched majors 3 times before landing on communications, all paid for by Richard. Daniel, my stepbrother, was too busy texting under the table to even fake interest in another round of pick on Michael. Michael has a 4.0 GPA in all his advanced placement classes, Mom said softly. His computer science teacher says he's the best student she's ever had. I felt good hearing that. Mom hadn't stuck up for me, even a little bit, in months. Richard waved his hand like he was shooing a fly. Playing with computers isn't a real skill. Anyone can do that these days. He turned to Daniel. How's the new job going, son? Daniel looked up from his phone, blinking like he'd forgotten he was at dinner. It's good. Mr. Hoffman says I might get my own account soon. That's my boy. Richard grinned, reaching over to clap Daniel on the shoulder. Real work, real experience. No student loans, no useless theory, just skills that actually matter in the real world. I took another bite of the dry chicken, not trusting myself to talk. Daniel only got his job at the insurance agency because of Richard's golf buddy, and from what I'd overheard, he mostly made coffee runs and fought with the copy machine. Michael fixed Mrs. Wilson's entire network last weekend, Mom added, her voice a bit stronger this time. She paid him $80. Richard's eyebrows shot up. $80? Well, why didn't you say so? Clearly he's ready to support himself. He laughed, and Jessica joined in right on cue. Daniel glanced between them, then forced out a laugh a few seconds late. I stabbed another piece of chicken with my fork. 1 more month. Just needed to make it through 1 more month till my 18th birthday, then I could start community college. The plan was pretty simple. Stay at home, work part-time, save every penny, then transfer to a university with a good computer science program once I had enough credits. My programming teacher, Miss Teacher, Chen, had already talked to me about scholarships if I could build up my portfolio. Jessica, honey, how's that new social media job going? My mother asked, obviously trying to change the subject. As Jessica went on about her Instagram strategy for some local boutique, I zoned out thinking about the code I'd been working on. Just a basic security app, nothing fancy, but Miss Chen thought it showed potential. If I could just get some time to work on it more. Michael? Richard's voice snapped me back. Are you even listening? This is exactly what I'm talking about. Always off in your own world. Sorry, I mumbled, though I wasn't. What did you say? I said, what exactly are you planning to do around here after graduation? Richard gave me a hard look. Your mother and I have carried you long enough. I felt my stomach knot up. I'd seen this coming. Richard had been making more comments lately about adults pulling their weight and no free rides. But hearing him say it so directly caught me off guard. I've been looking into part-time jobs that would work with my class schedule, I said. I could help with rent while taking courses. Richard made a noise. That's what's wrong with your generation. Always looking for the easy way. He jabbed at a piece of broccoli. When I was 18, my father said, there's the door. The best thing he ever did for me. My mother stopped with her fork halfway to her mouth but didn't say anything. Richard, she finally said quietly, maybe we should talk about this later? Nothing to talk about. Richard shrugged. Just having a conversation about responsibility. Right, Michael? I nodded automatically, something I'd learned to do over years of dealing with Richard's moods. Can I be excused? I have a coding project due tomorrow. Richard flicked his hand, already turning to ask about Jessica's latest shopping trip. I took my plate to the kitchen, scraped what was left into the trash, and headed upstairs. My tiny bedroom was the only place I could really be myself. My yard sale desk took up most of the space, with my computer as the centerpiece. I'd built it myself over 2 years of mowing lawns. Nothing fancy, but I'd picked each part to squeeze the best performance out of my limited budget. I dropped into my chair and opened the security app I was working on. Coding was my escape. It made sense in a way real life didn't. In code, everything follows rules and problems have actual solutions. Nothing like dealing with Richard and his constantly changing expectations. Someone knocked, breaking my focus. I quickly minimized my work, force of habit. Richard always had something to say about the gibberish on my screen. "Come in," I called. My mother slipped in and quietly closed the door behind her. She looked beat, with the harsh ceiling light showing the wrinkles around her eyes. "I wanted to check on you," she said, sitting down on the edge of my bed. Dinner was tense. I shrugged. "Normal Tuesday?" She winced. "Michael, you know Richard just wants what's best for everyone. He has his own way of showing it." I held back what I really wanted to say. What was the point? We'd had this same talk 100 times before and nothing ever changed. "I know." I lied instead. "Your college plans are good ones," she continued. "Very sensible. I'll talk to him about it again when he's not so worked up." We both knew there was no better mood when it came to talks about my future. Richard decided what he thought of me the day he married Mom, when I was 7. I didn't fit into his perfect family picture. "Thanks, Mom," I said, because it was easier than the truth. She smiled weakly and stood up. "Don't stay up too late coding." After she left, I turned back to my computer but couldn't focus. I opened my savings spreadsheet instead. The numbers were just as depressing as yesterday. Even being super careful with money, community college while paying rent anywhere would be tough. I was hoping to live at home for at least a year to save up some cash. I was still looking at the spreadsheet when I heard Richard and Mom talking through the heating vent in the corner of my room. The old house had weird acoustics that let me hear stuff I wasn't supposed to plenty of times before. "Can't just throw him out, Richard." Mom sounded more stressed than usual. "We've paid enough for him already." Richard wasn't budging. Once he turns 18 next month, he needs to understand what real life is about. I'm not paying for college for a kid who isn't even mine. I stopped typing. There it was, what I always knew. But Richard had never said so clearly before. "He's been applying for scholarships," Mom said. "He just needs some time." "Time is money," Richard cut her off. "Jessica and Daniel both chip in around here. He can do the same, or he can find somewhere else to live. Maybe that'll finally light a fire under him. Where is he supposed to go? That's not our problem, is it? He's so smart, I'm sure he'll figure something out." They started talking about Daniel's car needing repairs, and I leaned back in my chair. I felt nothing at first. It wasn't exactly shocking news, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I couldn't sleep that night. I spent hours looking up cheap apartments, emergency money for students, and jobs that might work with my class schedule. Nothing looked good. No credit and no steady paycheck meant no one would rent to me. All the roommate posts wanted people to move in right away, not someone planning for a what-if situation. By morning, my eyes hurt from staring at screens all night, but I had sort of a plan. First step? Figure out exactly what Richard meant. Maybe I got it all wrong. Maybe Mom would step in. I found Richard by himself in the kitchen, looking through some papers while drinking coffee. Good timing. "Got a minute to talk?" I asked, pouring myself some coffee even though I hardly ever drank it. It felt like a grown-up way to start a serious talk. Richard looked up, quickly stuffing the papers into a folder. I caught a glimpse of what looked like real estate stuff. "Make it quick. I've got a meeting in 30 minutes. I took a deep breath. I've been checking out some part-time jobs that would let me help with rent during school. I could pay $400 a month and still put away a little for when I transfer. Richard's face changed. "Always looking for the easy way out, aren't you?" "It's not easy," I said, trying not to sound defensive. "I'd be working at least 20 hours a week plus taking full-time classes. When I was your age, I worked 50 hours a week, not 20. He cut in. "No one handed me anything." "I'm not asking for free stuff," I said, seeing this wasn't going how I planned. "Just a chance to, that's exactly what you're asking for." Richard stood up, tucking the folder under his arm. "Staying here on the cheap while you find yourself in classes that probably won't get you anywhere. Computer science is a growing field with... Save it." Richard walked toward the door, then stopped. "Look, Michael, in the real world, nobody gives a damn about your potential. They want results. Think about that." He left me standing there with my coffee getting cold on the counter. Over the next 2 weeks, things got weird at home. I kept catching Richard looking at more property paperwork and having quiet talks with my mom about making changes around here. Whenever I walked in, they'd suddenly start talking about something else or just stop talking completely. My birthday was just 2 weeks away, and I kept getting this weird feeling Richard was up to something. I started sneaking my important stuff to my school locker. Hard drives with my coding work, personal papers, and the few family photos I had from before Richard. I also reached out to my friend Kyle, cautiously asking about potential housing options. "Everything okay at home?" he asked after class, looking concerned. "Yeah, fine," I lied. "Just thinking ahead to graduation and stuff." Kyle didn't seem to buy it, but he'd let it go. "Well, you know my family's place is tiny, but we could probably figure something out if you ever needed it. My mom still talks about how you fixed her laptop last year." I smiled, feeling a little better. "Thanks, hopefully it won't come to that." That evening, I overheard Richard on the phone in his office. "Yes, we'll sign the papers after the first of the month," he was saying. "Once the household officially changes, we'll be applying for the refinance." "No, that won't be an issue anymore. We're streamlining things." "Yes, just the 4 of us going forward." 4, not 5. So it was true, I felt sick. Later, I sat at my computer with the college planning website open, but I couldn't focus on it. Richard was going to throw me out on my birthday. My mother wasn't going to. Stop him! And I had less than 2 weeks to figure out what to do about it. I opened a new document and started listing resources, options, backup plans. Coding taught me one thing. Problems can be solved when you break them down into smaller pieces and tackle them one by one. I wasn't going to let Richard destroy my future. Whatever happened after my birthday, I would find a way to survive it, to adapt, to build a life I hadn't planned for. I woke up on my 18th birthday with sun in my face. For a second, it felt like just another normal day, until I remembered what Richard had said about real life and how he was done carrying me. I felt sick as I got dressed. I'd already saved my important stuff at school and talked to Kyle about crashing at his place if things went bad, but part of me still hoped Richard was just trying to mess with me. That hope died the second I walked downstairs. There was Richard, arms folded, my mom standing behind him looking all nervous. But what really told me everything were the 3 duffel bags sitting by the front door. My bags. "Happy birthday," Richard said, cold as ice. "It's time for you to move out." I knew this was coming, but hearing it still sucked. "What?" "Nobody ever said anything about this," I said, somehow keeping my voice steady. I looked at my mom, who was staring at the floor like she might find answers there. "Mom? Richard thinks this is best," she whispered, barely glancing up before looking away again. "Maybe you could stay with Kyle for a while?" She said it so casually, like I was just going to hang at a friend's house instead of being thrown out, it made me sick. I'd known for years my mom would never stand up to Richard. I had 10 years of watching her give in to prove it, but seeing her bail on me so easily still hurt so much. "Real men don't need handouts," Richard said with that know-it-all look on his face. "I was on my own at 18, made me who I am today." He dug into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, holding it out like he was doing me some huge favor. "This is more than I got. You have until 5 o'clock. I grabbed the envelope without checking inside. No way I'd give him the satisfaction. It felt like cash, probably not much knowing how cheap he was. "I need to get my computer," I said, heading for the stairs. Richard moved, blocking my path. "Your computer stays," he said. "We paid for that." "I built it myself with money from mowing lawns," I shot back, getting angry even though I was trying not to. "Our lawn, our money," he said, with that smug smile he always had when making up rules that worked out great for him. I could argue I had receipts for every part, but I quickly thought about my options. Fight and maybe lose the little he was letting me take, or just let the computer go and keep the rest of my stuff. Thank God I'd backed up my coding projects onto drives in my school locker. Somehow I knew this day might come. "Fine," I said flatly. He nodded, happy he'd won. "Better start making calls. Clock's ticking." I pulled my phone out and went to the kitchen, closing the door for whatever privacy I could get. My fingers were shaky as I scrolled through contacts, mentally sorting who might actually help versus who'd just say, "That sucks." Kyle answered on the 3rd ring. "Happy birthday, man. What's up? Remember when we talked about housing options?" I kept my voice down, pretty sure my mom was listening from the hallway. "I need to take you up on that. Today." A pause. "Shit, seriously? What happened?" "Richard's decided I'm officially an adult and need to move out. Right now." "That's messed up." Kyle's voice lost all its usual cheerfulness. "Let me talk to my parents." "How much time do you have?" "Until 5 today." "Jesus. Okay, I'll call you back in 10 minutes. Waiting for Kyle to call back, I went through what I couldn't leave behind. Clothes, important papers, my old laptop. Crappy compared to my desktop, but mine since I bought it with birthday cash from my grandparents. The hard drives from my school locker. Basic bathroom stuff. My phone buzzed. Kyle texted back. My parents said you can crash on our couch for a couple weeks till you sort stuff out. Not great, our place is tiny, but better than nothing. I felt so relieved, then immediately hated that I was now officially somebody's charity case. Thanks so much. I can chip in for food once I get a job. Don't sweat it right now. Just pack your things and text me when you're good to go. I'll swing by and get you. I put my phone down and just stood there in the kitchen, looking at the calendar where Mom had written, Michael's 18th birthday, in her perfect handwriting with a little smiley face. Pretty messed up to see that happy note on the same day I was getting kicked out. I went upstairs to figure out what to take with me. Mom was in the hallway. She started to reach for my arm, then dropped her hand. I told Richard you should at least finish the school year here, she said, barely above a whisper. But he says 18 is 18. It's fine, I said automatically, my go-to line whenever things got awkward with the family. It's not fine, she said, shocking me with this flash of honesty. But Richard... She didn't finish. She didn't have to. I'd heard all the excuses before. Yeah, Richard. I kept going up the stairs, no point standing there watching her pick him over me for the millionth time. My room seemed smaller somehow, like it already knew I was leaving. I grabbed my backpack and started sorting through my stuff. What to take, what to leave behind. Clothes were simple, just the basics. 2 pairs of jeans, enough shirts for a week, underwear, socks, my winter coat, and a hoodie. I found out later the duffel bags downstairs already had most of my clothes in them. Mom must have packed them. The personal stuff was tougher. My sophomore year physics trophy? Too big. Programming books? Too heavy? Plus I could find most of them online. The photo of Mom and me at the beach when I was 6, before Richard came along? That I kept, tucked between my clothes. I was almost done when Jessica showed up in my doorway, standing with her arms folded, just like her dad always does. So you're really leaving, she said. Wasn't even asking, just stating it. I kept digging through my drawer without looking at her. Not like I want to. Dad says it's time you learn to be independent. Dad says a lot of things. Jessica fidgeted a bit. Look, you had to know this was coming. He's been talking about it forever. I finally looked at her. And you never thought to give me a heads up? It wasn't my business, she said, at least looking a little embarrassed about it. Besides, you're smart. You'll be fine. Right, just like you'd be fine if he suddenly kicked you out to be independent. That's different, she shot back, because you're actually his kid. Jessica winced. That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair, I said, yanking my backpack zipper shut. But what else is new? She hung around for a second like she wanted to say something else, then just turned and walked out. I heard her bedroom door shut down the hall. When I finally came down with my stuff, Richard was by the front door, arms folded like he'd been standing there the whole time. Mom was nowhere around. I put my bags next to the ones already there and checked the envelope Richard gave me. $200 in 20s. Wouldn't even cover a deposit on the crappiest apartment in town, but he obviously thought he was being generous. Thanks, I muttered, stuffing the money in my wallet. More than my father gave me, Richard said again, his go-to line whenever talking about what parents owe their kids. I had to sleep in my car for a month. He wanted me to thank him for his generosity, for giving me notice, for his precious $200. I bit back everything I wanted to say. Where's Mom? I asked instead. She thought this would be easier, Richard said. Translation. She couldn't handle watching, but wouldn't stand up to him either. My phone buzzed. Kyle was outside. I threw on my backpack and grabbed 2 of the duffel bags. I'll come back for the last one, I said. Richard nodded. Just be out by 5. As I headed for the door, I caught movement at the top of the stairs. Daniel was there with Jessica beside him, both just watching. Neither said anything or waved, just standing there watching me get kicked out. Not saying a word against it, but at least feeling awkward enough to hide in the shadows. Kyle helped me throw my bags in his beat-up Honda. Got everything? He asked. 1 more bag, I said, going back in. When I came back with the last bag, Richard handed me an envelope. Your mother wanted you to have this. Inside was a birthday card with a cartoon cake on it. The message just said, Happy birthday, Michael. Love, Mom and her. Perfect handwriting. Nothing about kicking me out. No, sorry, nothing else. She'd stuck a 50 in there, probably all she could sneak without Richard seeing. Tell her thanks, I said, knowing he'd either never pass it on or twist my words somehow. He gave a short nod. Good luck out there. As Kyle drove away from the house where I'd lived for the past 10 years, I stared straight ahead. I caught my mom peeking through the living room curtains, finally watching me leave, but only after I was already gone. Your family is seriously messed up, Kyle said after we'd been driving in silence for a while. They're not my family anymore, I said, surprised how easily I meant it. Just people I used to live with. Kyle's parents didn't know what to do with me when we got to their apartment. Mr. Patel gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder and mumbled something about making myself at home, while Mrs. Patel immediately tried to feed me like a sandwich could somehow fix how screwed up everything was. Their place was tiny, just 2 bedrooms for Kyle, his parents, and his younger sister Priya, who gave up watching TV when the living room became my bedroom. The couch was old but okay to sleep on. The Patels were really nice about everything, but it felt weird taking their help. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat on the couch, my new bed, and made a list on my laptop of all the stuff I needed to figure out. Housing, for now, solved. Long-term need plan. Money, need job ASAP. School, figure out financial aid. Basic expenses, minimum to survive. Computer, need replacement for coding. Making a list made everything feel a bit more doable. I could tackle these one by one, starting with finding a job. Without money, nothing else was possible. The next morning, I hit up every place hiring within walking distance of Kyle's apartment. By that afternoon, I'd landed a job at Burger Boss, starting right away at minimum wage. The manager liked that I could start on the spot and work any hours they needed. Finally, getting kicked out had one upside. My first shift was that evening, 4 hours learning the register while wearing a polyester uniform. My trainer said would always smell like grease no matter how often you washed it. The job wasn't rocket science, but it kept me on my toes, juggling cranky customers and the non-stop rush of fast food. I dragged myself back to Kyle's apartment at 11 p.m., totally wiped out, but kind of proud of myself too. One problem down, sort of. The job wouldn't cover rent anywhere, but it was something. The next day, I went to the community college financial aid office, and that's where everything started falling apart. The counselor looked at my paperwork with a deepening frown. Without parental support or established independence, financial aid will be complicated, she explained, pointing to different sections of the forms. You'd need to prove you're supporting yourself, which means tax returns showing at least 1 year on your own. But I just became independent yesterday, I said, almost laughing at how ridiculous it all was. How can I show a year of tax returns? She sighed. That's the problem for students in your situation. The system just assumes your parents help until proven otherwise. You might need to put school on hold while you establish your independent status. I can't wait a year, I said, thinking about how far behind I'd be. There must be another way. There are hardship exemptions, but they require a ton of paperwork. Letters from social workers, proof of abandonment or abuse, court records. She trailed off, looking at me questioningly. I thought about it. Could I prove Richard had kicked me out? Would my mom back me up? Fat chance. Richard would never admit to throwing me out. He'd just call it teaching me responsibility or something. And Mom would just say whatever kept the peace. I'll look into it, I said finally, taking the stack of forms she handed me. The next week was brutal. I dragged myself to Burger Boss for the 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift, then head straight to the library to hunt for cheap apartments and beg financial aid offices to reconsider. Evenings meant hunching over my laptop, applying for more jobs and any scholarship I could find. At night, I'd crash on Kyle's couch, trying not to wake up his folks. I stretched that $250 from Richard and Mom like it was my last meal. No paycheck for another 2 weeks, and even then, it'd barely cover bus fare and ramen. Every day put college further out of reach. A week after my birthday, I finally took a breather and walked to my old high school. My student ID still worked, and on Saturday, only the basketball team was around. I grabbed the hard drives from my locker with all my coding projects on them. Without my desktop computer at home, these were the only copies I had left. That same night, I covered for someone who called in sick at Burger Boss. By the time I finished the double at 1 a.m., my feet were killing me. Even after scrubbing down in the restaurant bathroom, I still reeked of burger grease. Everyone at Kyle's was asleep when I got back. They'd left a small lamp on next to the couch for me. I tiptoed through my shower, then sat up with my laptop, going over the same damn numbers again. The math never got any better. Minimum wage minus food, bus fare, and rent left zero for tuition. Even with scholarships, I'd have to work full-time and somehow still make it to class, or find a job that paid way more than flipping burgers. It finally sank in that all my college plans were falling apart. I'd been running on pure stubbornness for days, just dealing with the practical stuff and not letting myself think about how much this sucked. I closed my laptop and headed to the bathroom, the only place to get some privacy in our packed apartment. Sitting on the tub's edge, I finally faced what I'd been pushing away. Everything I'd worked for was falling apart because Richard decided I wasn't worth helping anymore. I couldn't catch my breath as reality hit me hard. I turned the shower on to cover up any noise and slid down to the floor, my back against the wall, as I started crying. Not just because of how screwed I was right now, but because of all those years of being pushed aside that led to getting completely cut off like this. I tried to keep quiet at first, but then really lost it as I couldn't hold back anymore. I cried about my mom picking her husband's approval over standing up for me, about tiptoeing around my own house for years, about my brothers and sisters who just watched me get thrown out without saying a word, about spending 18 years building my life only to have it kicked apart on what should have been my big day. When I finally stopped crying, I splashed cold water on my face and looked in the mirror. My eyes were puffy and bloodshot, but somehow clearer, like getting it all out had actually helped me see things better. Looking at my tired face in the mirror, I made up my mind. Richard thought he was showing me how tough the real world is. What he actually showed me was what his family values and promises were really worth. It cost me a lot to learn that, but I'd never forget it. I would make it without him, without any of them. I'd start over with my plans. And one day, after I succeeded even though he tried to mess everything up, I wouldn't look back at tonight as when I fell apart. I'd remember it as when I finally stood up for myself. 3 years fly by when you're struggling to stay afloat. Mine were just a blur of greasy uniforms, late-night cramming, and way too little sleep. I bounced from Burger Boss to the gas station, then the call center, and finally landed at a small computer repair shop that paid worse but let me work with actual tech. The shop was called DigiFix, stuck in a strip mall between a laundromat and a cheap shoe store. The place always smelled like burnt plastic and Marcus's microwave burritos. But it had something the other jobs didn't. Computers I could actually work on. You fixed the Jensen laptop. Marcus flipped through invoices without looking up. They've been calling every day. Yeah. I cleaned up my hands. Their cooling fan was toast and the hard drive was failing. I swapped both out, saved their data, and updated their security software. Marcus finally looked up, surprised. You did all that in one day? I shrugged. It wasn't complicated. Well, Mrs. Jensen will be thrilled. Last tech told her she'd lose everything. He pushed another work order across the counter. Think you can handle this one too? It's some kind of network issue for a small accounting firm. I looked over the paperwork. Easy stuff. Probably just needed better firewall setup and security. I can do it tomorrow. 3 years of hustling got me a tiny apartment with crappy heat and a community college schedule that worked around my various jobs. Financial aid finally came through after I proved 12 months of supporting myself. A huge relief after fighting the system for so long. My coding projects got pushed aside while I focused on surviving, only finding time between classes and whatever job was paying my bills that month. But I kept at them, working late at night when I was exhausted but still had ideas. You closing today? Marcus asked, already putting on his jacket. Yeah, I've got this. Once he was gone, I grabbed my laptop. The same beat-up one I took when I left Richard's place 3 years ago. It was barely holding together with electrical tape now. Between customers, I'd been coding a security app that could spot network weak points without all the useless extras you get in commercial software. The bell above the door jingled, and I quickly minimized my work. Be right with you, I called, sliding my laptop under the counter. The customer didn't come to the register right away. He just walked around looking at our pathetic collection of used computers and spare parts. He seemed about my age, maybe a bit older, wearing a button-down and slacks. Definitely not our typical crowd of stressed-out parents and grumpy old people with broken laptops. You guys do business network installations? He asked, finally approaching the counter. Depends how big, I said. What exactly do you need? Something better than what I've got, which is basically nothing. He extended his hand. Robert Wilson. I'm trying to get a consulting business off the ground, but technology isn't exactly my strong suit. I shook his hand. Michael Winters. What kind of consulting? Marketing and business development for small companies. Robert leaned against the counter. I've got the business degree and the ideas, but every time I try to set up my own website or secure client information, I end up wanting to throw my laptop out a window. I couldn't help smiling, which wasn't my usual reaction to strangers. There was something about Robert that I liked right away. He was just honest and direct, which was a nice change from customers who tried to bargain me down on every single repair. We don't usually do on-site setups for home offices, and I told him, but I could probably help you after hours. Robert raised an eyebrow. Freelance work? Something like that. Perfect. When do you take lunch? I'll buy you a sandwich and tell you exactly what I need. I hesitated. Lunch breaks at Digifix weren't really a thing. Marcus would vanish for hours while I watched the shop. When he finally showed up, I'd grab something from the vending machine, but today had been slow anyway. I could take 30 minutes now, I said. The deli next door is decent. Lead the way. Over turkey sandwiches, Robert talked about his business ideas with more excitement than I'd seen in, well, maybe forever. Most people I knew were just trying to survive, not change the world. People need simple security solutions. For their small businesses, he explained, gesturing with a pickle spear. Something affordable that actually works. These mom-and-pop shops can't hire IT departments, but they're handling sensitive customer information every day. I nodded, thinking about my own projects. The security stuff on the market is made for big companies with IT teams. Small shops end up paying too much for features they'll never use, or they go cheap and get something that doesn't really protect anything. Robert pointed at me. Exactly. You get it. I've been working on something like that, I said. It's a simple program that finds weak spots and blocks them before they become problems. For real? Robert leaned forward. Is it something you could implement for actual businesses? I thought about it for a second. My program worked, but it wasn't pretty or finished. Still, with a bit more work. It needs cleaning up, but the important stuff all works. Robert got all excited. We should definitely talk more about this. This is exactly what my clients need. Let me fix your home network first, I said. Then we can talk about other stuff. That Saturday, I went to Robert's apartment, a place not much bigger than mine, but in a slightly better neighborhood. His home office consisted of a laptop on a folding table, surrounded by business books and empty coffee cups. I know, it's pathetic, he said, following my gaze. But it's just temporary until I get some real clients. I spent 3 hours setting up security basics, installing software, and showing him how to keep it running. Robert paid close attention, asking questions that made it clear he wasn't as clueless about tech as he'd made out, just needed some training. This is already 1,000 times better, he said when I finished. What do I owe you? $50 is fine. Standard rate for side jobs. Robert handed me cash, then hesitated. About that security system you mentioned? Would you be willing to show me? I paused. I'd never shown my personal projects to anyone before. That was my private stuff, the one thing I had total control over. It's still not finished, I said, not really answering. I get that, but I'm working with a local bakery that desperately needs something better than their current setup, which is basically password 123 and crossing their fingers. It could be a good test case. I had to admit I was tempted. Testing my code in an actual business would show me what worked and what didn't. I'll bring my laptop next time, I said finally. Next time turned into weekly meetings. After my shift at DigiFix, I'd meet Robert at a coffee shop halfway between our places. I'd code while he worked on business plans. Sometimes he'd look over my shoulder with questions or suggestions. For a guy who claimed to know nothing about tech, he actually had pretty good ideas. The interface needs to be simpler, he said one night. The bakery owner can barely check email. She'll never figure out these menus. He was right, even though I didn't want to admit it. I'd made it work well, but I hadn't thought about making it easy to use. I can make it simpler, I said, already thinking about how to redo the whole thing. Our coffee shop sessions got longer as we worked on what we started calling the prototype. Robert began bringing real problems from clients, and I started writing code that solved their specific issues. After 3 months of working together like this, we installed our program at Sweetness Bakery. It was a tiny shop with 3 registers and customer info that until then had been protected by the owner unplugging everything at night. This is amazing, said Gloria, the owner, watching as I demonstrated how to check for unauthorized access attempts. And I can actually understand how it works. Robert shot me a victorious look. Word got around fast. Our security program caught on with local shop owners beyond just Robert's contacts. Within 2 months, we'd installed it in 5 more places, making it better each time. We need to talk, Robert said after our 5th successful installation. He slid a folder across the coffee shop table. Inside was a full business plan. Not just random notes, but a complete roadmap for turning our side project into a real company. He'd even named it Shield Tech Solutions. We need startup capital, he continued. And you need to quit that repair job to focus full-time. I looked at the numbers. They were hopeful, but not crazy. Still, quitting Digifix meant giving up the only steady thing I'd had since Richard kicked me out. I can't just walk away from a regular paycheck, I said. I understand that better than you think. Robert's face got serious. My dad lost his job when I was in high school. I watched him take whatever work he could find just to feed us. Trust me, I get why a steady paycheck matters. I hadn't shared much about my past with Robert, but he'd pieced together enough to know I was on my own. How would we fund this? I asked. I've got some savings. Not much, but enough for a few months if we're careful. We could work out of my apartment to start. Cut every corner possible. I flipped through his business plan. It was risky as hell, but it could also pay off big time. That evening, I received a rare call from my Aunt Susan, my mother's sister who lived 2 states away. "Just checking in," she said after awkward pleasantries. "Your mother mentioned you're working at some computer place now." My mother? I hadn't spoken to her since the day I left, though I knew she got updates from relatives. "Something like that," I said, not wanting to give any details she might pass on to Richard. "Your stepfather's always bragging about teaching you self-reliance," she added with no idea how that hit me. "Takes credit for how independent you are. Says throwing you into the deep end was the best thing for you." My grip tightened on the phone. The nerve of that guy. Taking credit for me surviving when he did everything possible to make sure I'd fail. It made me absolutely furious. "I should go," I said abruptly. "Early morning tomorrow." After hanging up, I opened my laptop and pulled up my savings account. $3,427.18. Not much, but it represented 3 years of sacrifice, skipped meals, no social life, clothes worn until they literally fell apart. I thought about Richard bragging about my self-reliance at family get-togethers, acting like he'd been tough on me for my own good, like kicking me out was some kind of favor he'd done me. The next morning, I gave Marcus 2 weeks' notice. "You're making a mistake," he said, not looking up from his inventory list. "Startups fail all the time." "Maybe," I agreed. "But staying here guarantees I'll never find out what could have happened." Robert and I made our partnership official the next week. He would handle the business side and deal with clients. I would take care of the technical stuff. We both put our savings into a business account that looked pretty sad compared to what we were trying to do. Shield Tech Solutions started up in Robert's apartment, with a folding table as my desk and the coffee maker running non-stop. We ate nothing but ramen and worked on pure determination, putting in 18-hour days that all started to melt together, endless coding and cold calls. That first year kicked our asses. Most nights we crashed on the office floor. We ate the cheapest crap we could find. We worked way past what any sane person would call reasonable. I'd code until I couldn't see straight, then keep going anyway. Robert would pitch to literally anyone, getting better at it with every no. 6 months in, we were down to our last $842. "We need one good client," Robert said, pulling off his tie after another day of meetings. "Just one decent-sized deal to keep us going." 2 weeks later, he burst through the door with a grin I could see before he even spoke. "First National Credit Union," he announced. "They want our security suite for all 12 branches." I stared at him. "The regional bank? How did you—" "Their IT director used to work with one of our small business clients. Word of mouth, my friend." He dropped a signed contract on my desk. "This is it. The one that keeps us alive." The contract wasn't huge by industry standards, but for us it was everything. It would pay our bills for 3 months and, even better, give us a name we could drop when pitching to other clients. By the 18-month mark, we'd gotten a small office space, hired our first employee, a part-time administrator named Layla, and rolled out version 2.0 of our security software. I finally upgraded to an apartment with reliable heating and sometimes remembered to eat real food instead of just microwave meals. Things really picked up after that first breakthrough. We hit 10 employees with clients across the state by year 3. 2 years. Later, we were up to 30 people and had opened a second office in a nearby city. 7 years in, with locations in 3 cities and some actual industry cred, I finally let myself admit what we'd built. Shield Tech had gone from barely hanging on to actually doing well. We weren't the industry giant we wanted to be yet, but people respected our tech and clients stuck with us. My personal life had improved too. I ditched my efficiency apartment for a modern condo with furniture I'd actually bought new instead of finding on the curb. My clothes weren't thrift store specials anymore. They actually fit. Little comforts I couldn't even imagine during those homeless months were now just normal parts of my life. On a rainy Tuesday night, I was looking over acquisition projections in my home office when my phone buzzed. I nearly ignored it. Late messages were usually just Robert sending articles or ideas he thought couldn't wait till morning. But the sender's name stopped me cold. Elizabeth Barrett. My mother. The subject line was simple. "Richard needs your help." I stared at my phone, all my professional cool gone in a second. 7 years of nothing and now this? I hadn't talked to any of them since that day. Not Elizabeth, not Richard, not Jessica or Daniel. I'd hear stuff occasionally through distant relatives, but never directly. I almost hit delete right away. Whatever mess Richard had gotten himself into wasn't my problem. I'd learned that lesson pretty clearly while sleeping on Kyle's couch, working double shifts and fighting for financial aid. And yet, curiosity, definitely not compassion, made me open the message. Michael, it began. I hope this email finds you well. It's been too long, and that's our fault entirely. I snorted at the understatement. I'm writing because we're in a difficult situation. Richard lost his job 18 months ago, and we're 3 months behind on mortgage payments. Foreclosure proceedings have begun. As I kept reading, I felt something twist inside me. Not sympathy exactly, but something I couldn't quite name. Elizabeth wrote that Richard couldn't find similar work. They'd used up all their savings and had tried everything else they could think of. He's too proud to ask himself, she concluded, but we have nowhere else to go. I put my phone down and walked to the window, staring at the city lights. Talk about irony. Richard, who'd thrown me out with nothing but a duffel bag and $200, now needed help from the stepson he'd tossed away. My gut reaction was to delete the email and block the address. Simple, clean. Exactly what you'd expect when dealing with people who'd shown they didn't give a damn about me. But something else, maybe just wanting to see how this played out, made me pick up the phone again. I forwarded the email to James, ShieldTech's corporate attorney, with a quick note. Can you quietly check if this is legit? I need the real story before I decide what to do. Then I closed my laptop, poured myself a drink, and sat in the dark living room, thinking about a scared 18-year-old who once cried silently in someone else's bathroom, believing his whole future was ruined. That kid survived, actually thrived, built something real from nothing but grit and raw talent. And now the man who tried to break him was asking for a lifeline. I spent that night stuck somewhere between my current life and the past I thought I'd left for good. I couldn't sleep at all. Whenever I tried, my mind kept showing me flashbacks. Richard standing by the door with my bags already packed, my mom hiding behind the curtains, and that weird smell from Kyle's couch where I crashed for months. By morning, I'd thought up like a million ways to answer Elizabeth's email. Everything from just typing no to writing a whole rant about why they deserved whatever mess they were in. In the end, I didn't write anything. Just left her message sitting there in my inbox like a bomb I wasn't ready to deal with. James called at 9:30 a.m. I've started looking into what you asked about, he said in his British accent, not asking why I needed this info. That's one of the many reasons I liked working with James. He never pried. It might take a few days to get all the details. Just give me the straight facts. Don't sugarcoat anything. Got it. I'll call when I have something solid. I buried myself in work for the next week, checking code for our newest security system, sitting through endless partnership meetings, and saying yes to hiring requests. The everyday stuff of running ShieldTech kept my mind off the questions that kept bugging me. Why now? 7 years without a word and suddenly I'm family again? On Thursday afternoon, my assistant told me James had arrived for our meeting. He was waiting in my office wearing his usual dark gray suit and holding a leather folder on his lap. Thanks for coming in person, I said, closing the door behind me. Some things are better discussed face to face. James waited until I sat down before opening his folder. I've put together everything about the Barrett money situation. He slid a document across my desk like he was handling something important. It's pretty bad, just like your mom said, but not exactly for the reasons she told you. I looked at the first page, which showed a timeline of money problems starting a year and a half ago. Richard Barrett did lose his position at Barrett Contracting, James continued, though saying he'd lost his job is kind of misleading since he owned the company. Did he go bankrupt? Not officially. The company ran out of money after several building projects failed. Instead of filing for bankruptcy, Mr. Barrett sold off what the business owned to pay the urgent bills. He basically shut everything down while avoiding the formal bankruptcy process. Typical Richard, always trying to save face. And the house? I asked. This is where it gets interesting. James flipped to the second page of his report. Your stepfather has remortgaged the property twice in the past 5 years. The first time was to invest in a restaurant franchise that closed within 8 months. The second was to purchase a timeshare property in Florida and make what his financial advisor called aggressive market investments that totally flopped. I wasn't surprised. Richard had always talked about big opportunities and real investments while trashing my interest in education. His idea of financial planning was whatever got him status symbols the fastest. The property is currently valued at approximately $320,000, while the outstanding mortgage balance is $534,000. I let out a low whistle. How do you end up underwater by over $200,000 on a house you've owned for 20 years? Bad money management plus the neighborhood going downhill. James gave a slight shrug. The foreclosure is scheduled for next month. They'll be served eviction papers on the 15th. Have they looked for alternatives? Loan modifications, bankruptcy protection? Mr. Barrett has looked into several options, but turned them down for reasons that don't seem to be about money. His financial advisor told him to file for bankruptcy protection, but he flat out refused. Pride. The same pride that had led him to throw me out rather than support my education was now stopping him from fixing his own mess. You should know one more thing, James said, checking his notes. Before reaching out to you, they asked both Jessica and Daniel for financial help. That wasn't in Elizabeth's email. And both said no. From what I hear, Jessica blamed her student loan debt, while Daniel said he couldn't afford to help right now. Daniel bought a new Range Rover 3 months ago, I said, thinking of a social media post Kyle had mentioned to me. We didn't talk about my former family much, but I still caught bits of news here and there. Yes, that car was financed completely, about $92,000. James kept his voice neutral like he was reading a weather report. Seems like he's crying broke while living large. I had to laugh. Richard had always played favorites with Daniel, setting him up with jobs, paying for his college when he'd refused to help me. Now his golden boy wouldn't even bail him out. What happens after foreclosure? I asked. The property will go to auction. Given the current market and outstanding balance, the bank will likely take a significant loss. Richard and Elizabeth Barrett will face potential legal action for the deficiency balance, though whether the bank pursues this would depend on various factors. I got up and paced around my office. After 7 years of building something from scratch, I could now solve their problems with what was basically pocket change to me. Thank you, James. This is exactly what I needed. He closed his portfolio and stood. If I may ask, what do you intend to do with this information? I'm still deciding. James nodded, accepting my dodge. If you need anything else or want to take some action, just let me know. After he left, I sat at my desk, staring at the report. The numbers on the page confirmed what Elizabeth's email had only hinted at. Richard and Elizabeth were about to lose everything, just as Richard had made sure I started with nothing. The symmetry was almost too perfect. I left work early that day, something I rarely did. My condo felt empty when I arrived, all sleek furniture and minimalist decor that suddenly seemed cold instead of stylish. I'd never bothered with personal touches, no family photos, no mementos, nothing I'd miss if it disappeared tomorrow. My laptop was still on the kitchen counter where I'd left it that morning. I opened my personal drive and clicked on a folder I hardly ever look at. Inside were the few photos I'd managed to save before Richard kicked me out. There was my high school graduation, just me and my cap and gown, no family around because Richard said their presence would distract from my achievement. What he really meant was he didn't want to sit through a ceremony for a kid who wasn't his. I kept looking through them. The opening day of our first actual Shield Tech office, Robert and I standing in front of some plain door with our freshly painted logo. Then the day our company went public, the team gathered around as Robert and I rang that ceremonial bell, looking like I couldn't believe what was happening. 7 years building something from scratch. 7 years proving Richard wrong with every step forward. Not that he ever knew about it, but he'd find out now, wouldn't he? If I answered Elizabeth's email, I closed the photos and pulled up a new browser tab to look up info about foreclosures. The whole thing was complicated, but followed a pattern. Banks just want their money back, not houses. They'll often take a direct offer before auction if it saves them the trouble. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert about tomorrow's board meeting. I texted back without thinking much about it, but my head was already somewhere else entirely. What would it actually take to buy Richard and Elizabeth's house before auction? The next morning, I called James into my office again. I need some info about buying a foreclosed property, I said, getting right to it. James kept a straight face, but I noticed his eyebrow go up slightly. I'm guessing we're talking about the Barrett place? Hypothetically, what would it take to buy the house before auction? We could make an offer to the bank to cover the debt, James explained. Banks usually prefer avoiding auction costs if they can get back most of what they're owed. With your finances, getting the money would be easy. And the current owners? Would they know who bought the place? Now both eyebrows went up. Not necessarily. We could set up a shell company for the purchase. People do it all the time for privacy reasons. I nodded and turned to look out the window. The city spread out below, a landscape I'd learned to navigate starting with nothing. Because I started with nothing. What are you trying to do here, Michael? James asked, his tone gentle but straight to the point. Fair question. What did I want? To get back at them? Justice? Closure? Some mix of feelings I couldn't even explain to myself? I'm not really sure, I admitted, but I need to see this through. James looked at me for a second. I get it. Want me to start making arrangements? Yeah, and find out exactly when they'll get their eviction papers. The 15th of next month, according to what I know. About 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks. Enough time to get everything ready. Do it, I said. Set up the shell company, make an offer to the bank. I want to own it before they get that eviction notice. I'll take care of everything, James promised as he got up to leave. One more thing, I added. Don't tell Robert the details. If he asks, just say it's a personal investment. After James left, I turned to my computer and booked a flight back to my hometown for the first time in 10 years. The date, the 15th of next month. As I confirmed the reservation, I felt weirdly calm. Not emotional or impulsive, just clear-headed for once. When he kicked me out, Richard made one thing super clear. Whoever has the power calls the shots. Well, now I had the power and I'd use it however I wanted. I closed my browser and got back to work, getting ready for a trip home he definitely wasn't expecting. I was parked across the street, just sitting in my rental with the engine off, staring at the house. The beige siding, the neat lawn, those brass numbers by the door, nothing had changed. Except for Elizabeth's flower beds, now full of weeds growing through old, faded mulch. 7 years since I'd laid eyes on this place. 10 since I'd called it home. My phone buzzed. Text from James. All done. We own it now. Eviction notice getting delivered at 2 p.m. I checked my watch, 1:52. Perfect timing. The neighborhood was dead quiet this Tuesday afternoon. Just a few cars in driveways and the occasional dog walker passing by. Nobody even noticed another car parked on the street. I cranked up the AC and waited. At 2:04 on the dot, a courier's van pulled up. A young woman in a company polo took out a big envelope and walked to the front door. 3 knocks, and there he was. Even from across the street, I knew him right away. That stocky build and the way he stood with his chest out and chin up, like he thought everyone should bow down to him. He scribbled on the little electronic pad, probably thinking it was just another Amazon delivery. The courier left, and Richard stood there opening the envelope. As he read it, I could see him practically crumple, shoulders dropping, head shaking, hand going to his forehead. Then he turned and went inside, not even closing. The door all the way. Through the front window, I watched the scene unfold. Richard was waving his arms like crazy, pacing back and forth. Elizabeth came in from the kitchen, took the papers from him, and put her hand over her mouth. Then she sank into what I guessed was still that old blue armchair, the one she'd always claimed as hers. I waited an hour, time enough for them to freak out, make some desperate calls, and realize they were screwed. While they panicked, I just sat in my car answering work emails. Weird to be handling ordinary Shield Tech stuff right before turning their lives upside down. At 3:15, I drove across the street and pulled into their driveway. I felt a little nervous walking up to the door, but stayed calm. This wasn't personal. This was about payback. I rang the bell and heard that same old chime from my teenage years. Light footsteps came toward the door. Elizabeth? When the door opened, her jaw dropped. She'd aged a lot. Her reddish hair had gone gray in spots, and her face had a bunch more wrinkles now. She was wearing an old blouse I remembered from way back, like she hadn't bought new clothes since they ran out of money. Michael? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Is that really you? Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. She'd been crying. Hello, Elizabeth, I said, using her first name. Not Mom. She lost that title the day she stood by and watched Richard kick me out. She reached out toward my arm, then pulled back. I can't believe you're here. Did you get my email? I wasn't sure if... What the hell is going on out there? Richard's voice boomed from inside, and then he showed up behind Elizabeth, pushing the door wider. He'd gotten old. The reddish hair I remembered was now dull and streaked with gray. His face had gotten flabby, and instead of his usual fancy business clothes, he was wearing a polo shirt with a small stain on the collar. But his eyes still narrowed the same way when he saw me. That fake authority hiding how defensive he really was. What are you doing here? He asked sharply, pulling Elizabeth behind him. Come to gloat? I kept my face blank. I hear you're losing the house. None of your business, Richard snapped, but his voice sounded different now. Brittle instead of confident. Desperate. Actually, it is my business, told him. I own the house now. Elizabeth made a small noise, like she couldn't decide whether to gasp or cry. What are you talking about? Richard squinted at me. Milestone Investments is my company, I said, watching as he finally got it. I bought the property from the bank this morning. Richard went completely pale. He tried to speak twice before any words came out. You? But why would you... Real men don't need handouts, I said calmly. Isn't that what you always told me? You have 30 days to get out. Richard changed in an instant. His shoulders dropped, and his face went from angry to fake friendly. Son, he began. His voice totally different now. We can work something out. Everyone hits rough patches. I've been meaning to call you. I'm not your son, I cut him off. You made that perfectly clear when I turned 18. You have 29 days now. Elizabeth stepped forward, already crying. Please, Michael. We have nowhere to go. I knew exactly what to say. I'd been waiting years for this moment. That's not my problem, I said, throwing back exactly what Richard had told me when I called from my friend Kyle's couch after losing my third job in 2 months. Richard's face turned red. Now listen here, he started, but Elizabeth grabbed his arm to stop him. Michael, she tried again, I know we hurt you. What we did was wrong, but please don't do this. I looked right at her. Did you say that when Richard was packing my bags? Did you tell him not to kick out your 17-year-old son? She winced. I tried. Not hard enough, I cut her off. Richard stepped forward, switching to the look I knew best, the one he used when trying to manipulate people. Look, we made mistakes, he said, spreading his hands like he was being humble. But family is family. We can work this out. Maybe you could give us more time? Or we could pay rent? I've got some job opportunities coming up. The same way I had opportunities coming up when you told me I needed to understand what real life was about, I asked, keeping my voice steady even though I was getting angry. The notice gives you 30 days. That's 29 more than you gave me. Elizabeth was sobbing now, not even trying to wipe her tears. Michael, please. Where are we supposed to go? I looked her straight in the eyes. That's not my problem, I repeated. The words hit hard. I turned to leave, feeling satisfied. Behind me, Richard called out, suddenly sounding desperate. Wait, Michael, we can figure this out. I've always respected how you pulled yourself up. That's what I wanted for you. I kept walking to my car while he kept shouting behind me. I've got a business opportunity coming. Just a few more weeks. I'll pay whatever rent you want. He sounded so desperate, nothing like the Richard I remembered, that I almost turned around just to see his face. But I'd done what I came to do. As I opened my car door, Elizabeth yelled from the porch, her voice cracking. Michael! He's your stepfather. I'm your mother. I paused with one foot in the car. I looked back at them. Richard with his hands out begging. Elizabeth holding onto the doorframe like she might fall. Family doesn't throw family away, I said loudly enough for them to hear every word. You made your choice 10 years ago. Now I've made mine. I got into my rental car and drove off, Richard's desperate shouting fading as I left. In my rearview mirror, I could see them in the doorway of what was now my house, looking small and old and scared, just like I had been once, 29 days after breaking the news. I stood in the driveway with the keys, looking at what was now my house. My rental car looked weird parked where Richard's truck used to sit. Just another sign that things weren't the same anymore. I'd had the locks changed right away. Didn't want to risk Richard showing up with his old key. The paperwork from James said they'd moved out yesterday, hitting my 30-day deadline right on the nose. I took a breath and opened the front door. The place stank of dust and staleness, with that sharp cleaning smell that couldn't hide what felt like panic. They'd obviously rushed out. You could see little marks on the walls where they'd banged furniture while hauling it away. There was still a lonely picture hook on the living room wall, where that Barrett family portrait used to hang. I walked through the living room, my steps echoing loudly. Everything seemed tinier than I remembered. The spacious living area Richard always showed off to his buddies was actually pretty small. Those premium hardwood floors? Just cheap laminate with worn patches, where furniture had sat forever. In the kitchen, there was a coffee mug in the sink, with a faded flower pattern, Elizabeth's probably. She must have used it that morning before they left. I just left it there and kept looking around. The dining room floor still had those marks from Richard's chair, worn deeper from years of him shoving back whenever he wanted to make a point at dinner. I could practically hear him. The problem with your generation. I went upstairs and the steps creaked in exactly the same spots I'd memorized as a teenager trying to sneak around. That second step from the top was still the loudest. I skipped right over it without thinking. The upstairs hallway showed rectangular clean spots on the wallpaper where photos used to hang. Looking closely, I could tell which ones had been there. The big empty space where Richard and Elizabeth's wedding picture once took over the wall. Smaller spaces from Jessica and Daniel's school photos. And that tiny spot where my picture briefly appeared before they swapped it for some random landscape. I stopped outside my old bedroom door. 10 years since I'd slept here. I opened it. The room was empty except for one cardboard box sitting in the middle of the floor. Elizabeth had written Michael on it in black marker. Her writing looked shaky, like she wasn't sure if she should be doing it. I stared at the box for a while before walking over. Someone had already pulled back the tape and left the flaps open. I knelt down and looked inside. School certificates, perfect attendance awards, honor roll papers, science fair ribbons, letters from teachers. My computer science project that Miss Chen had really liked. A folder with every report card from kindergarten through high school, straight A's with comments like exceptional student and really talented. Elizabeth had kept all this stuff. I picked up a certificate from a coding competition I'd won sophomore year. The frame was cheap plastic, now yellowing. I remembered how proud I felt showing it to Elizabeth. She'd smiled and said, "That's wonderful, honey," before nervously glancing toward Richard's study. My phone rang, snapping me back to reality. James's name popped up on the screen. "Hello, Michael," he said when I answered, his British accent familiar and calming. "Were you able to get in okay?" "Yeah, they're gone." I put the certificate back and stood up. "Any problems with the final paperwork?" "None at all. Everything's transferred completely." James paused briefly. "I should mention that Elizabeth Barrett has called our office 3 times today asking for more time. They've already moved out." "Yes, she mentioned that. But she wants to come back for things they couldn't take when they left. I told her she'd need your permission for that." I looked at the box of my achievements. Still no. They had 30 days. "Got it. I'll tell her if she calls again." James kept his voice neutral. "I've also found out where they went. They've got a 2-bedroom apartment at Westridge Complex across town. Pretty small compared to what they're used to." "Not my problem," I said automatically. "Of course. The inspector should be there within the hour. Would you like me to send the renovation team's first report now, or wait until after the inspection?" "After is fine. Let's see what the inspector finds first." After hanging up, I left my old bedroom, shutting the door behind me. The box could stay there for now. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it yet. I kept looking around, noticing water damage in the upstairs bathroom ceiling that nobody had bothered to fix. Jessica's room still had those pink walls, now looking faded and cheap. Daniel's room had posters still stuck to the wall, either forgotten or not worth taking. The master bedroom was completely empty except for a broken lamp in the corner. I could see Richard's pettiness and all the little damage around the house. A hole in the drywall here, a broken cabinet hinge there. Not major destruction, just little screw you signs he'd left behind. The doorbell rang while I was checking out a crack in the master bathroom shower tile. The inspector was right on time. "Mr. Winters?" The inspector was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a clipboard and digital camera. "I'm Diane Mercer from HomeSpec Inspections. Thanks for coming so quickly." I led her inside. "As you can see, they've moved out, but they weren't exactly careful with the place." "That happens a lot in these situations," she said matter-of-factly. "Let's start with the structure and work through all the systems." For the next 2 hours, Diane went through the house making notes about everything wrong with it. Water damage in the bathroom, broken garbage disposal in the kitchen, you name it. Years of Richard putting off repairs had really done a number on the place. The inspector figured it would take at least $45,000 to fix everything before we could sell it. "The HVAC system is on its last legs," she said, pointing out rust all over the unit. "And looks like there's a small leak in the roof above the north bedroom. It's already damaged part of the ceiling." My phone went off with a text while she was checking the electrical panel. Elizabeth, again. "Michael, please call me. There are some family heirlooms we couldn't take. Just 30 minutes to collect them, please." I ignored her call that came right after and put my phone on silent. Diane and I were talking about renovation options in the kitchen when I noticed someone outside the window. It was Daniel walking up the driveway. "Excuse me," I said to Diane. "I need to take care of something. Just keep going with what you're doing." I got to the front door before Daniel could ring the bell. He looked the same, but a bit heavier with shorter hair. He still had that fake, laid-back look on his face that always drove me crazy, like nothing in the world was worth caring about. "Michael," he said, hands shoved in his pockets. "You've made your point." No greeting, no mention of 10 years of silence, just straight to his message. "I wasn't aware I was trying to make one," I said. "Come on." He waved his hand at the house. "All this? The shell company? Showing up right when they got the eviction notice? You wanted to hurt them, and you did. Mom's a mess, and Richard's totally humiliated. Isn't that enough?" I looked at my former stepbrother. He was still wearing expensive stuff. Designer jeans and a button-down that probably cost more than what Richard got in a week from unemployment. The Range Rover James had mentioned was parked at the curb, shiny and new. "This isn't about revenge," I said. It's about consequences." Daniel let out a big sigh. "Look, I get it. They treated you like crap when you were a kid. Richard was an asshole, but it was 10 years ago and they're old now." "Old enough to know better," I said. "Old enough to have made different choices when they still had options." "They're family," Daniel said, getting louder. "They decided I wasn't family 10 years ago," I said calmly. "That decision had consequences. So did them blowing all their money. So did your choice to buy a $90,000 SUV instead of helping them with their mortgage. Daniel flinched at that. How did you? I do my research. I glanced over my shoulder, seeing Diane taking photos of the kitchen cabinets. Is there anything else? I'm in the middle of an inspection. Jessica and I can't take them in. Her apartment's tiny, and my place... He trailed off, suddenly aware of how bad this was going to sound. Your place is perfectly sized, but you don't want your lifestyle disrupted. I finished for him. I understand completely. That's exactly how Richard felt about having me in his house. Daniel's face flushed. That's not fair. Few things are. I started to close the door. Give my regards to Jessica. Wait. Daniel put his hand on the door. What are you going to do with the house? That's not your concern? Are you going to live here? Because that would be pretty messed up, don't you think? Like some weird revenge fantasy? I almost smiled at how far off his assumption was. Goodbye, Daniel. He took his hand off the door but didn't walk away. They tried to contact you before, you know. Years ago, when things first got bad. Yes, 7 years of silence, then suddenly I'm family again when they need money, I said flatly. Interesting how that works. People make mistakes. Yes, they do. And then they live with the consequences. I closed the door, ending the conversation. When I turned around, Diane was standing in the hallway pretending she hadn't overheard everything. I've finished looking everything over, she said, handing me a preliminary report. The full report with photos will be emailed to you by tomorrow morning. Thank you. I took the paperwork, relieved to be talking about the house again. Any problems that would stop us from renovating? Nothing we can't handle. The house is actually pretty solid overall. Just needs a lot of updates and fixing all the stuff that's been ignored for years. After she left, I called the contractor James had recommended. He could start work next week and thought it would take about 2 months to fix everything up. With that taken care of, I walked through the house one last time. In the kitchen, I stopped at the exact spot where Richard had stood, the morning he told me I needed to understand what real life was about, where he'd laughed off my plans for college as looking for the easy way. My phone went off again, Elizabeth calling for what must have been the 10th time today. I ignored it again, but this time I opened my messaging app. I typed, Richard taught me that real men don't need handouts. He was right about one thing. I didn't need his. I sent the message, then called my real estate agent. Olivia, it's Michael Winters. I want to put the Oak Street house on the market after we finish fixing it up. I ran my hand along the kitchen counter where I'd eaten so many silent meals. And I know what I want to do with the money. I'm listening, she said. I want it all donated to the downtown youth homeless shelter. Every penny except for your commission and what we spend on fixing up the place. That's very generous, Olivia said, sounding shocked. They do amazing work there. I know. I'd looked into them carefully. They help homeless kids find a place to stay, finish school, and get jobs. Exactly what I needed 10 years ago but didn't know existed. After hanging up, I stood in the empty kitchen for a bit longer. The house seemed different now. Not a reminder of old pain, but something useful I could turn into real help for others. I went back upstairs to my old bedroom and picked up the box of achievements. I'd take these with me, not to remember the family that kicked me out, but to remind myself what I could do on my own. As I carried the box to my car, I saw that Daniel's Range Rover was gone. The street was quiet, just like when I first got here. I put the box in the trunk, next to my laptop with contracts that were worth more than this whole house. Standing in the driveway for the last time, I looked at the house differently. It wasn't Richard's anymore. It wasn't really mine either. It was just a building that would soon help people who had nowhere else to turn. I got in my car and drove away without looking back. We'd fix up the house, sell it, and turn the money into something Richard never figured out how to make. Real help for kids who had nobody. That wasn't revenge. That was justice. And it was enough.